Welcome to Being the Genuine Athlete podcast, where we inspire those who aim for excellence in life and want to understand the how and what it takes to be a champion in life. My name is Jure Koschak. My purpose, dedication, and commitment is to activate your potential, that you understand the ego through your sport and life situations. So I share and give you the tools to be just this, the genuine athlete. Are you ready to tune in?
Hello, today we are with Renata Porter. Can you please tell us something about yourself, where you come from, and what you're all about?
Okay. Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. I am I guess basically a long-term serial fixer with organizations and working with teams and leadership and massive projects, just kind of being a wrangler for getting everybody situated and structurally organized for efficiencies and best outcomes. And when I came back I lived in New Zealand with my husband and my children for 10 years, and we came home about 2.5 years ago, back home to the US in Texas. And I knew when we moved home, I was like, I'm really tired of doing this for other people. So I kind of would like to start my own consulting gig and kick this off and do this on my own. And in the midst of doing that, I completely underestimated how difficult it would be to not only be out of the country for 10 years with no contacts, but to be out of the state for 20 and not have the right contacts. But when I got started, I was asked to go back to one of my friends that I grew up with, as president of a swim team. We swam together. And she's like, listen, I kind of want to apply these principles to my club. And it just kind of through that process, I went, oh, this is it. This is what I need to be doing, And so it just kind of, I've been working for the last year trying to make the shift from working with new organizations to applying my principles and how I work to nonprofit sports clubs. And I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it.
Great. I'm so happy that I have you, because sport and efficiency and organization is something that brings results, not only the trophies, but results in your life, your feelings that athletes are actually searching for. And a lot of times I know that me being a former pro athlete and now working with athletes, there are small steps that needed to be input and adjusted, and you already have a big change in life. So please let us know how you see and depict and do that due diligence, that you can then do that bring that organization and create that environment that it's so beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, so I think I mainly work with boards and then the head coaches. And I think what people, usually everybody understands that nonprofit organizations runs off of the backs of volunteers, right? But I don't think that people really truly understand like how much time and effort actually needs to be put in to be effective, to do the things so the coaches can do the right things. So to do the right things that bring opportunities for all of the members and the athletes, not just your high caliber, but every single member that's part of that club or organization. And I think when you kind of get people off of the concept of it's just a kids sports club, right? And getting them to think about, no, like you're on a board and you have due diligence and duties and responsibilities, just like you would if you were on any other nonprofit board, that if you are able to like really recruit correctly, build your roles correctly, do your processes correctly, and just start in that path, how much more you could serve your athletes and your coaches is unlimited, and how much more opportunity you can bring. I mean, the coach should be worrying about coaching, not whether or not he's got a field to go to practice, or a pool to go to practice, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. When COVID hit, a lot of memberships went way down, not only because financially things were unstable, but because people just couldn't practice, couldn't be around each other. So parents just kind of, let go of their memberships. Well, if you have a club that's not organized and structured and doesn't know how to take that kind of financial hit, well, you're kind of spinning. So like being structured and organized, I think one thing that COVID taught us is that being ahead of the game really pays off, and being able to make well-informed decisions about, how do we proceed? Like, how do we not just survive, but thrive, but it's all the boring stuff. People don't want to write processes. People don't want to write job descriptions. People don't want to think about what the treasurer should be doing exactly, not just, hey, he runs the money. There's a little bit more to that.
Yeah, it's actually science and very specific mathematics of life, algebra of life or alchemy of life behind it. And please tell me if you also notice how a lot of things are taken self-granted, and athletes as organizations think, oh, but we are doing sport, so it just goes. Oh, but you know what you need to do. It's a lot of assumptions. It's a lot of,
Yeah.
it will just go somehow. But how much actually is worthwhile digging into this, as you mentioned, and setting the ground rules and descriptions, and then the organization and the athlete itself or the team can flourish and actually thrive. How much do you see this self-granted and assumption world?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest issues. Okay, one of the biggest problems is actually getting the volunteers, right? But the other problem is not being ready for them and just kind of winging it and hoping that they know what to do, right? So and luckily a lot of clubs survive off of those that are just, okay, I'll just figure it out myself. Even though there's been 3 other people before them that has done that exact same job, they'll spin and do 5 hours or 5 weeks, depending on the size of the work that needs to be done, spinning instead of executing and creating efficiencies, right? So if somebody has to repeat work that's been done over and over again because there's been no handover, no documentation, no, like, even a conversation, like, yeah, when you open the concession stand, put the hot dogs on first. I mean, that seems so trite and silly, but I mean, there should be checklists and processes from something small to something big. Like, even if you're looking at let's just take your president role. What happens if that person can't show up? Like, something happens or they have to go on leave. Like, does everybody know what he was working on or what she was working on? Do they know what contacts she had just made and she was supposed to be following up on? What sponsors were they courting? Like, there might have been a really big, multi, really large $1,000, $10,000, $20,000 grant that they were working on that might have got dropped because there was no documentation or handover, right? And I think that's what people don't recognize, that if they would just put a little rigor, then you won't lose those volunteers that are like, hey, I came to work. I didn't come here to, like, sit here on the bench and try to figure out how to do something for 3 weeks before I want to add value now, not later down the road. You should have this stuff, sussed and figured out. And I think that's the other thing. Like, we have a hard time finding the right volunteers. And then when we actually get volunteers, we're not prepared for them. So they end up leaving. And I think with nonprofits, you have that turnover anyways. You're going to have turnover. So the more that you can plan, the better and more efficient, you can make that person feel like they're providing the valuable contribution they want as an individual. And you actually you meaning the board, the club, the members actually get to reap the benefits from that, instead of just saying, yeah, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's all about this figuring out and winging.
Yeah.
And in this context, I believe we need to touch the role of parents. They are volunteers, but non-voluntarily volunteers. They are not even named or labeled as volunteers. They are just there because they're parents, and they are used so much. I see that there's a lot of burnout happening, especially with parents who want to, of course, bring and give everything to the organization and the kid itself. Can you can you shed a light on this subject about parents and burning out in this way?
Do you mean burning out as a volunteer, or just burning out
As a
on
human
just,
being a volunteer,
yeah,
being
just
here,
like,
being there, because they take on so much, as you mentioned.
yeah,
Those are also consequences because the organizations are not prepped and they are not
yeah,
organized. That's
yeah.
that's the
I
consequence.
remember I was a swimmer, right? So I'm up very early, training 2.5 hours, going to school, training for 2.5 hours or 3 hours in the afternoon. I'll never forget the day I got my driver's license. My mom was like, I am done, lady, you're on your own, right? So
Yes.
um I think that one of the biggest things that clubs can do to help with their parents and to help with their volunteers is recognizing the time and effort that people put in. I think a lot of times we don't actually thank our volunteers, or we'll thank that one volunteer that did that really massive project, right? But what about everybody else? Doesn't matter how big the work is, how little the work is, or giving a little bit of um, recognition to the
Yeah.
parents for showing up every day, and that parent that gets out of his car and sets up the cones, or make sure the lane lines are pulled through, or drags the sand pit, whatever they're doing, right? So I I think first of all we need to recognize our parents, and I think also as a club, and this really kind of sits more with the coaches, with the support of the board and the volunteers, is that we need to take into consideration when we do our planning, when it's for events and when it's for practices, that if you were to plan and and communicate early, it removes a tremendous amount of stress from the parent who's trying to get not only one kid back and forth, but two kids back and forth to two different things, plus their own jobs, plus their everyday life of chores and shopping and just everything they've got to do. So I think if I had one recommendation, it would be to plan a little bit better and to communicate early. So when practices change or things shift, or there's a competition that you want to go to, if you know you want to go to it, like, communicate early so parents can plan, they can take time off, they can get their financing done, they can understand that maybe their kid might make the cut for that event, and what does that mean for me and my family, what is the impact, what's the excitement, that kind of thing. So I think part of it is just, again, it's part of the boring stuff, it's the planning and communication.
Yeah, but the
I don't know if I
boring.
answered your question,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
sorry
you
about
did,
that
you
if I
did.
didn't.
It's the
Okay.
recognition, and it's this approval and appreciation that's
Mm,
taken so self granted, and so such an assumption is being made from the organizations and
yeah.
coaches as well sometimes,
Yep.
because as if there's not enough energy or something. There's always time to be kind and to appreciate.
Yep.
And you mentioned a couple of times already now the boring planning. Boring is only when you look at it from the way of ego, when you look at it from the way that always something needs to be excited, as if our brain is wired that we need excitement out of stress. No, we don't. We can
Yep.
prepare, and it's not boring. It's just, it seems boring for the first minute or maybe for the first initial phase. Can you
Yeah.
please bring us into that, how you, maybe step by step, in a shorter version, how you deal with a situation, organization, how you go into the field?
Well, I do quite a few different things structurally and organizationally. Like, I really try to set them up for success. First of all, I try to get them to understand what their vision is and
Mhm.
where they're trying to go, and a lot more than just the BS of putting it on a sheet of paper or doing a quote at the bottom of a website. Like, don't waste your time writing a vision if you don't have a plan on how to deliver it, right? So it has to be a real vision. And I want to know what your values are that support that. And I want to know what behaviors, what are the steps that you're going to take to actually reach that vision. So that's a big part of what I do. And then out of that, I also do the strategic planning that goes, okay, you want to get here. How are you going to get there? Okay, we got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to do this, right? But if I were to back up, because everything comes down to, once you figure out where you want to go, you still have to write a plan on how you're going to get there. And then what is everybody going to do? And what are their expectations and what are their steps, right? So if I were to shorten that piece up for you, it's more of, like just start writing. Like if you're in a role today that you know that if you left tomorrow, the club would go into a tailspin, you should be writing down what you do every day, what you do every week, what tasks have to be completed, who are your contacts. Just write it down, right? If you're doing something that's like actually needs a process doc, like this is how you send, like if the secretary's out and you need to know how to send out the newsletter, right? Something like that. Then it's more of step one, go here. Step one, step two, go here, right? If it's a concession stand, it's a checklist. Just put the hot dogs on first. They're in the freezer, right? Put this, pull the buns out, whatever, make sure you got enough cash, that kind of thing, right? So it just depends on what kind of role you're looking at. But I go from like the big picture, where you want to go. Let's get into it. Let's not just spit out a bunch of words that have no meaning, right? That's my thing. And then let's organizationally look like, do you have the right people to deliver that? What kind of skills do you need? Right people in the right seats, right? I think a lot of times, because we're so desperate for volunteers, we take warm bodies and they're really not either suited for the role, meaning they don't have the skill set, or they have the skill set, but they don't have the capacity. They only have 2 hours a week to give. They don't have 10 hours a week to give, right? Or whatever it is. Or they absolutely have no passion whatsoever to do the job. They just say they'll do it. But so in all of those scenarios, we kind of set ourselves up for failure for not being pointed about how we want to manage our volunteers, which means we need to understand the roles, we need to understand the outcomes, we need to understand where we're going. And if clubs would just take a minute and do that due diligence, do that work, I mean, it will just start, success just starts flowing, because you know where everybody's going, you know what everybody's supposed to be doing, right? And then when changes, emergencies, hiccups happen, you're able to manage and handle them because you know what everybody's doing and where they're going and where they're headed. So, and I think we
Yes.
have a lot of our volunteers that burn out because we take so many clubs feel guilty about asking for people to volunteer with certain skill sets, or they're afraid to tell them, like, no, this is a board president role. It is 10 hours a week, not 2 hours. They'll say it's only 2 for hopes to get somebody, but then realize they're not actually setting them up for success by not telling them it's actually a 10-hour job. But I think the problem is what happens in a lot of clubs is all the main work comes down to like 1 or 2 people, when it should be spread across the board of many people. You can get so much more work done. But again, it takes planning and understanding what you need and where you're going and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. Can you now slowly going to this situation that's been going on since 2020, and how not a lot of people were prepared for it? I always repeat this in every podcast or coaching call that I have. I've been preparing for 2020 since 2010, not in the virus pandemic sense, but preparing on the stress, on the changes that come from the outside, and how to cope and adapt, how to be flexible, having that core flexibility. Right. So in light of this, can you connect the dots past volunteering, like 20, 30, 50 years ago, being a volunteer? We cannot compare the worlds, of course, but how it was set up. And of course, now we have way more information, way more devices and everything and applications. But can you compare, maybe as I see it, that in the past, because it was a volunteering society in a way 50 and more years ago, it was way more like grounded and everybody knew. Now it's like spread, but not in a good way spread like in a destructive way, the volunteering space. And I know that you come in here with your expertise, that you organize it.
Yeah. Well, I think also, just to touch on that, it's spread and not as organized, but it's taken way more seriously than it was.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, everybody who has a kid in sports thinks their kid's going to be a professional athlete.
Yeah.
And I don't know about in other countries, but in New Zealand and even in the US, you have the parents who get really irate when their kid's not performing at a high caliber when they're not there yet, right? So it's so much more serious now. I think it's not as fun, and I'm not saying it's not all, I'm not saying that it's all bad, right? There's a lot of good things about it. But I think what I'm trying to say is, in the past, when people knew that they needed to give back and they did give back, I think the art of sport was, the intention was fun. Now the intention is, my kid has a chance to make a multi-million-dollar, even more, a billion-dollar contract. I can get out of this rat race. That's a lot of pressure to be putting on your kid, right? So I think that shift of seriousness also means, you've got a higher population, there's bigger teams, there's higher competition, you've got kids who are in multiple sports. Well, that just dictates and makes it necessary that clubs have to be more organized to take that. Those families who are there and want to have their kids be treated like high caliber athletes, those families who are just there because they want their kids to be involved in sports to learn life lessons, right? Those families who have that kid that's in 10 sports, it's in 5 sports and music and something else, So I think it is crazy because our environment is much more crazy. There's a lot more pressure on children to perform at a younger age than I think there was, right? So my take is that, the athletes that are going to go on to become professional athletes will just rise, you know, and because there's some of that ability, and then there's also part of that coaching and everything else. But now it's like everybody's got a shot to be that, that multi-contract athlete that can make it and get their family out. So I just think the pressures are there, which is all the more reason to do the right things as an organization, to be able to support your members in the way that they need to be supported.
Good. Yeah. That's the main difference. What about, did you notice and experience now post 2020, the humbleness that organizations are finally also dealing with the boring stuff, also understanding that if they want to thrive and survive in the basic, they need to invest and digest and dig into this to organize themselves. As you mentioned in the beginning as well, now they are more, now you see them, they be more open. How did you get that attraction?
Well, I think not only with my nonprofits, but with my startup companies, I mean, everybody took the opportunity to take a step back and go, oh my God, I got to make cuts, which means I need to understand my business better, which means I might have to have one person do 2 different roles, which might mean, right? So people had to actually step back and take stock of what they were doing and how the heck they were going to do it and make it if people were going to be not working or working from home for a long period of time, right? And if I translate that over to the sports clubs, I have a club that I worked with. I was fortunate enough to work with in the summer of 2019 and got them structured and organized, and they knew who was doing what, who had right roles, how coaches were reporting into each other. They had KPIs set up so they knew how they were excelling. They knew areas where they had gaps, and they knew which divisions of their team had high membership, low membership. I mean, they really had a really good look of their organization. So when COVID hit, they were able to sit back and go, okay, well, we've got a drop in membership here. This is how we need to handle it. We might need to, bench a few coaches here. Maybe we need to look at our staff. We don't really need our staff right now. Your operational staff, we don't need our staff right now. Or maybe we ask everybody to take a whatever percentage cut so we can keep everybody working and moving forward. But during that adversity, what it did is those who were able to take stock or who were organized prior knew exactly where they could make adjustments and changes and roll with it and be better prepared to go, oh man, we got to completely shift our thinking. So the ones that were prepared were online, social media, trying to pull their kids together and getting them doing some, even if the training had nothing to do with the type of sport, they were getting them organized and communicating online. Okay, I know we normally practice in a pool, but let's all get together and do exercises via a live Facebook session, right? So the point I'm trying to make is those that were structured and organized, while they might have had a bit of panic, they didn't have the same amount of panic as those going, we have no money coming in. How are we going to pay all these people, right? They were able to go, okay, we can make some shifts here. And you know what? We're going to put practices online. We're going to start bringing our kids together so they can still talk to each other online. Let's have some great sessions, and they were able to shift. And I think you hit the nose on, or the nail on the head when you said, when people they don't have those efficiencies and those processes together, they're not able to manage with the change. And I think it was a big awakening for a lot of clubs and a lot of businesses. In the US, we had kind of a bailout program called PPP where they could apply for paycheck protection. And that did help a lot of clubs, but they had to have the resources and the context to be able to pull all the information together to get access to that money. And it's not all just about money either. It's about community, it's about connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned now, the community and the connection. Please explain the difference, because being a volunteer prior to 2020 and being a volunteer now, like also a lot of athletes or kids athletes, it's good. I was, as a kid, in my club a lot of times volunteering. And as a table tennis player, we had a lot of tournaments and I was helping, of course. And we did a lot of things that I never could think of being reimbursed in any way. It was volunteering, but you were just a part of a club. But now everything, as you mentioned in couple of questions priorly, is more specific, it's more perfectionalized, it's more explicit. So also these volunteerings, how do these organizations now in a sports environment use that and leverage that? Because bringing back their clients, their members is crucial, not just to survive, but to move forward in life and thrive. And how do they market and promote being a volunteer? Because they need to sell the story as well, I think.
Yeah, I think, listen, one of the things that I tell clubs to do is you need to be talking about your volunteers in everything that you do. Everything, every event internally, every event that you have, dinner, whatever, you thank your volunteers, right? You have an opportunity to promote your athletes. I don't know, you're being interviewed live on TV, you've got a news article, whatever it is. This can't be done without our volunteers. We really love our volunteers. Need to volunteer? We need volunteers, whatever it is. They need to be taking advantage of the opportunity, any opportunity, to be telling people early they need help instead of last minute. It should be planned, not a knee-jerk reaction, but also taking advantage of any medium, any audience that they have to be thanking and asking for volunteers. Because I can tell you right now, if I feel valued and appreciated for the work I do, I'm going to actually go out and recruit more volunteers. If I feel a club doesn't know what they're doing, are completely disorganized, and don't value my time, well, I'm not only not going to go out and find people, I will probably tell people to think twice about volunteering for that organization, right? So I think the difference too is with people who've had to sit back and look at their efficiencies. Hopefully they take that as people are starting to get back into sport and going, okay, let's get our structure together so we do it right this time. Make sure that we have the right people, right? We thought we needed this role, but we found through this downtime that we didn't really need that role. It needed to be this role, which is an offshoot, or we didn't need that role at all, whatever it is. I'm hoping that they don't just slide back into old habits and they learn from this experience and go, okay, we need to be putting a little bit more rigor about what we're doing. We need to be efficient. everybody on the board needs to understand the budget, not just the treasurer, and everybody needs to understand the impact that they make on the organization, the decisions that they make, and the impact on the organization. Because I just think people have, on boards and major volunteers have just been really lazy and lackadaisical. You got one or two people that hold the entire club up. And it's kind of disappointing, because there's so many people in the world that want to give of their time, that could be providing amazing skill sets. Why do they have to go volunteer at another type of organization? Why can't they do that high caliber work for a sports club? And I just think I'm hoping that out of this situation that clubs have realized that they need to be responsible for their efficiencies and how they work with their volunteers.
Mm. Yeah, I believe, and I live it, and I work for it, that we all live, every human being, in order to be in service of each other in some or other way, some or other form. We want to contribute. We want to feel being used and useful. And that is what gives us life and light and love, because when you are able to share your skills and abilities and behavior and bring your best out, that's the whole deal. And you mentioned this community and this connection. We see this, maybe we see it from the outside. I don't know how it is on the inside. I was a part of the Universiade for students, the Universiade Games in Bangkok back in 2007. And I had a volunteer attaché that was taking care of our team, the Thai girl. And I'm still in contact with her in some way through the years. And we see these volunteers being, as a community, brought together for big events like Olympic Games, Universiade, this UEFA European Championship now for football, maybe FIFA World Cup, all these big games, basketball, also swimming. These big events bring the best out of the volunteers and the organization. But copying this organization, this volunteering scheduling organization to a small organization, I think it's important to bring that big energy event into this small environment as well, because this is the lifting up.
Yeah, that's bring that big energy. I love that. Because you're right. Everybody wants to feel like they're valued and that they provide value. I don't think any volunteer shows up and puts their hand up to do a bad job. Nobody wants that. Nobody does that, right? But it happens over and over and over again, right? And I just think that, I think if we, like you said, approach it big, like let's lift each other up. We all have something to offer and to add, but just make sure that you're utilizing people in the right ways, right? So if somebody has, I don't know, their skill set is in organization and running events, well, don't ask them to work on the budget, right? So I think it's utilizing people in the right way as well. And also people who want to volunteer, you need to be upfront. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do, but I want to learn and I've got a passion for it, right? Or I can only give 2 hours a week, but man, I'm here those 2 hours. What do you need me for? Right. And I think if clubs can embrace that big energy and making sure that everybody feels good about what they're doing and they understand the impact they're making on that team, those kids. Because again, it's not just about the sport. This is life. You're teaching kids life skills, how to communicate with each other, how to be supportive of one another. Because you know what? Games don't always go the way you think they're going to go. People's events don't always go the way they think they're going to go, right? So building those bonds and the relationships and life skills, being organized, you got to pack your bag every morning, right? I mean, those are huge life skills. So it's more than just the kid competing or the team competing. It's life skills that if everybody understands the value and you can entice that behavior and that attitude of positive and everybody's giving something. Oh my God, I just can't even imagine the the outcome for the club, right? So it's a well-oiled engine and everybody's feeling great.
Yeah, I come from Slovenia. It's the only country with love in the title of the country. And we have a Slovenian language, and we have this word for help. It is pomoč, pomoč. But it means, if you dissect it, po, it means for or after, going after for, and moch, it means power. So you ask for power. When you ask for help, you go and ask for power that you're lacking or that you're resisting or that you're in need of. So that's why you ask for help. And giving this, attributing this power to the volunteers, because mostly I think that there's a stigma around volunteers that they're like, yeah, come, okay, we'll use you somehow.
Yeah.
But they're actually additional help that without them, sometimes they're the essential part of the organization and the event itself. So they bring power that's so necessary. They are the power itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that giving them that power, and I feel like it's like when you have that planning and everything aside, it's not just like it gets you out of the mindset of just taking on a warm body, but what it also does is it empowers your volunteers to do a good job because they know what they need to do. They know the expectations, they know the steps or the things that need to be accomplished, right? So you're asking for those volunteers, but it also empowers those volunteers to actually do a good job because you've got yourself organized and structured and you got a bit of rigor around the role. And sometimes roles are new. Sometimes you're bringing on somebody to do a task that the club's never done before. And that just means that the structure needs to be built. That's okay. You know, and you'll learn a lot out of that, right? Oh, that didn't work. Let's try it this way next time. As long as it's there and documented, so there's lessons learned for the next crew coming around goes, okay, we know what not to do, or we know why this didn't work. It's a great plan, but this little piece here just kind of sabotaged it, right? So again, that's all things that businesses would do or should do in order to make sure that they're successful. So why can't that apply over to sports clubs so they're successful, right?
Cool. So, yeah. Thank you for that, for adding. And do you have anything else you'd like to share, you'd like to put emphasis on regarding the subject of volunteers and the sports environment organizations?
Well, I just think that two things. If you want to volunteer, because studies have shown that between like the ages of, I don't know, it's crazy ages, like between the ages of 14 and 75, right? About 70% of people want to volunteer. Wow. They just have no idea how to do it or where to go, right?
Yeah.
And I think clubs assume that people don't want to volunteer. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they either don't even know you exist in their community, or they assume you've got everything handled and you don't need volunteers, right? So I think if you want to be a volunteer, look around in your community, talk to people in your community and ask, like, is there a sports club? It doesn't have to be sports club. It could be anything. Is there a library? Is there whatever that you want to donate your time to in the area? And then seek them out to offer. And when you go to offer, like, don't just say, I want to be a volunteer. I want to be a volunteer. Here's my skills. Here's just some of the things I could do. Does that sound like something you could use? That way you're not wasting your time and they're not wasting your time, right? And I think the other side of it, which we already talked about, is clubs cannot assume that people know about them. They can't assume. They might not have had kids for 10 years. So how would they even know you're there, right? So just, or they may be new to the area, right? So you have to put yourself out there and making sure that you can pull volunteers in. I think if you don't mind, I'd like to plug myself a minute. I'm on my website, so yoursportsresource.com. If you do /bonus after that, there I've got a free little sheet that is basically goes through how to recruit and retain volunteers. And it's free. It's just a little downloadable sheet that people can go in and just go, okay, we do this. So we don't do this. Maybe we should look at this. You know, a checklist of sorts for people to understand maybe how they can pull volunteers in and to help their organization.
Great. Yes. I'll mention, and you can find, listeners and viewers can find this link below. so they can click on it and then get the information that's necessary.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Anything else, last thoughts that you would like to share?
No, I want more people to get out there and make an impact. I want more people to volunteer, but I also want them to be utilized correctly. So if you are a board member, a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, whatever role you hold, please take your recruiting process, your onboarding process, your handover process, your rigor activity seriously, and make sure that you can really take advantage of the people who want to give of their time so they bring value to the club and they feel valued.
Yeah, it's like life is like a game, and if you put it on a basketball court or in a swimming pool, there are rules that needed to be applied and that need to be respected, that everything flows and that the game goes.
Yeah.
It's the same with organization, it's the same with volunteering. So that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We all want success.
Thank you very much, Renata. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
You. Lovely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. Follow me on Being the Genuine Athlete Instagram and Facebook page. Share, like, and comment, and be genuine all the way.